Today we are joined by Simon Lancaster. He is of BespokeSpeeches.com. I love the word bespoke. We're going to go into that in a minute. I met or was introduced to Simon by Mark Bowden, and that was because in an aside, Mark Bowden spoke about Simon Lancaster in his book while they were evaluating Donald Trump's recent speech. And I've had Mark Bowden on multiple times, along with Tracy Thompson and the other folks on the behavior panel and the whole behavior panel. And I'm really honored today to have you on. Simon Lancaster, how are you doing?
Really well, and I'm so grateful to you for inviting me on. This is fab, Eric. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as I said a minute ago, I just love the word bespoke. And there's actually kind of a funny story with that, but I had a previous guest on a couple years back, Jocelyn Stone. She's an adult entertainer. Yeah, she doesn't like the term porn star.
That's where you were going.
But she and her friend would make videos, specialized for clients. And one of your fellow countrymen, John Ronson, who writes for The Guardian, sometimes has written some fantastic books. I'm a huge fan. He did and talked about bespoke porn. And I asked her about that. I said, so are you doing bespoke videos? And she had no idea what the word was. And then she and her friend were talking later on their own podcast saying, he said this crazy word, bespoke. What does that mean? Is that even a thing? So I love the story. I love the word.
Yeah.
This
is fantastic. I don't know what it is. Maybe there's something in the air today. But I was talking about porn. Now you're worried. Okay.
No, it's a day that ends with Y.
Yeah, just a couple of hours ago. And I'll tell you why, because someone was saying, what's a speechwriter like? And I was saying to them that being a speechwriter, often you get this image that the speechwriter is like a Machiavellian puppeteer operating in the shadows. And I said, no, the correct analogy is actually that we're more like a fluffer on
ouch.
a porn movie, and we're the one that gets them ready to perform. So
hey, you've transcended. You used to say intellectual crossdresser.
Yeah, well, indeed, that's it. So I've gone from transvesticism to being a porn star. So you can see you've done your research so well. You've already broken down completely in the first 2 minutes. You know exactly how my mind works.
Well, perfect. And you have a mutual friend, Mark Bowden.
Yes.
And I can totally see by his personality. Now, what I'm doing on my show is I have this strange thesis that body language, persuasion, manipulation, all the way is a spectrum from trying to influence people to building a cult.
Yeah.
It's all on a overall spectrum. And as such, I interview a lot of different people in different areas of it. And one thing I find interesting is on the body language front, there's a lot of readers. And then there are people like Mark Bowden, who obviously reads, but he's a projector. And I feel like you as well work on the projection side. You'll read to see if you're getting feedback, but you're kind of more about shaping a message and putting it out for people to digest. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I would summarize it is that Mark is a body man and I'm a word man. So I'm all about, the words. Where I met Mark, funnily enough, I think it was 2 years ago, and we met in the middle of a forest in Sweden, of all places. Now, what we were doing, it was for a firm of Scandinavian management consultants. And basically, they should have televised this. It would have made wonderful TV. We basically took 6 people who were terrified of public speaking, and we got them to deliver speeches to the 900 people in the room, which they all did to standing ovations. And now I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of people who work in the field of body language, given it on body language. And most of the people that I have worked with over the years, because I don't claim expertise on body language, not in the slightest. You know, I'm a wordsmith, but most of the people I've worked for are found to be like actually defective. They do more harm than good. You know, they try people to repress their personalities. You know, don't do that. Don't show this. You know, and I get left feeling, hang on a sec, it's like you've put a vacuum cleaner to the backside of my speaker and you've hoovered out their personality. And Mark did not do that. Mark, absolutely brilliant at body language, and he really got them expressing this is his thing. So we met in this forest in Sweden, and we had a lovely dinner together. We'd read widely the same sort of stuff. We both had an obsession with the Beatles, and we both enjoyed wine as well. So we had the most amazing time together, and it was very generous of him to wave my book around on the podcast.
Well, fabulous. And it's funny because I can see where that might be the same philosophy. You, from all the speeches and everything I've seen, seem to want to take the personal elements of the person or their personality and enhance what they are saying or what is natural to them. And I'm going to guess, and just if you focus on what they're already doing and say amp that up a little bit, other things are going to naturally recede. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. So, you know, I always start with my clients with the assumption you have something brilliant to say, and it's my job to try and pull that out of you, which I will do. You know, I have good questions that I can ask, pretty open questions that will just get people to open up. And then you just take the seed of an idea that they have generated, and then you plant that, you allow that to grow, rather than, I think, what some communicators and speechwriters can do, which is they think, I know exactly what she needs to say, and, you know, they think they know better than the person writing for. I always start off from a position of complete humility with my clients, and if anything, the challenge for me is to completely squash down my preconceived ideas about whatever it is that they're trying to say. You know, I've been a speechwriter for 20 years now. I don't know how many times I've written speeches about climate change, you know, about values, about visions, all of these kind of stuff. I've written so many speeches about them. And there's a real danger for me that I go in and see a new CEO who's launching a new strategy, a new vision, whatever it is. And instead, I think I'm going to tell this client exactly what they need to say. The key is to really get into their soul, and because then when it's their words and their ideas, what they see in their head, they will speak with so much passion and so much authenticity. They don't actually need much help with the body language, because it will come naturally to them. They will believe what they say already.
By doing it in their voice too, does it make it much more natural for them in terms of memorization too? Like, if it sounds like something they would say, even if they don't get the words exact, it's still something that they're saying. Is that something you focus on? Yeah,
totally. So like psychologists talk about this idea of schema, don't they? Like, you know, the way that we connect ideas together, the way that our brains work through neuron connections, synapses, and all of that, like mind maps, you know, and it's my job to try and find out what's going on in your head. What's the little tube map, the train map that underlines what you're saying? And to do that effectively, I really do need to squash down my own thoughts and ideas, because they will say words to me that instantly activate either my own schema, or if not the schema of someone else who I wrote a speech for 3 weeks ago. And, you know, then you're going to come up with something that is just really hard for your principal to deliver, and probably it'll be really hard for the audience to hear as well, because you'll wind up with that awful like dog's breakfast of different ideas thrown in together and no semblance of consistency.
Okay, this is a different genre, but it's still writing. I don't know if you're familiar, Stephen King's On Writing, but he says a very important...
Years ago, I don't remember it 20 years ago, I think I read it. It's a brilliant book, isn't it?
The key element of it, though, is kill your darlings. And I know he didn't come up with that originally, or kill your children's another version of it. Do you sometimes have to do that too? Like in a speech, you might have a part that you just is such a clever turn of phrase or statement that you love it, and you realize that it's kind of out of consistency with the rest, and you have to chop, even though it's the best part, you got to chop it out.
Yeah, well, for Stephen King and for other kinds of writers, I think it's actually easier to kill your own darlings than it is for the speechwriter, who frequently finds instead that it's someone else who comes along with a knife and they want to kill your darlings. Do you know what I mean? You don't even have ownership over the slaughter of your darlings, and rather instead you'll prepare this beautiful speech that you're so in love with, and then you'll send it off to some big corporate firm. The head of finance and the head of strategy, all of them will then be brutal. And I feel about these people the same way that people would feel about real child killers, you know, because the metaphor is absolutely right about the speech you're writing is your baby, and you want to protect it and look after it. And these nasty people in corporate life are killers. Exactly right, Eric. You got it. Yeah.
Well, that actually leads into the metaphor question too. Is that what causes some of the speeches to have the mixed metaphors that you speak about in your book, where you write it and you have one consistent voice and theme going through, and some accountant goes, "Oh no, that's not the way you say that. The proper phrase would be this." And so then it goes from, I think you say journey to mechanical, architectural, organic. I don't remember all of your terms, but is that what happens is they get in there, muck it around, and sometimes they do the most damage by changing just little elements?
That's it. And so what you'll find is, like, within companies, different parts of the company often have a different metaphor in mind. So typically what you'll find is the head of sales, head of commercial, will view the company as a warrior, and we're fighting, and it's blood on the streets. I mean, we're getting killed out there. You know, that's the way that head of sales will speak. And then the head of strategy will speak about it as if, you know, it's a plant that, you know, we're planting seeds here and we need to allow them to grow, blossom. The company change needs to happen. It's evolution. We want organic growth. And then the head of HR will view it as a car, and they'll talk about, we've got to drive change, accelerate reform, and, you know, put on turbochargers. And oh my God. And then the CEO will probably think about the company as his baby. And so he'll have that metaphor. And what you find is that there'll be some poor idiot, you know, in the middle of this in the company trying to make sense of all these different ideas. And because all the people that they're trying to mediate between are far senior to them, what you'll then get is just mixed metaphors. So the coordinator, the mediator, will think, well, I need to reference what the head of sales said and the head of strategy. So all those metaphors will go in there, and then you just end up with a jumble, which is why leaders who have a clear voice and a clear vision and are actually have that psychopath tendency that John Ronson writes about. You know, leaders who have that kind of thing going on can often come up with much clearer messaging, because they'll just think, you folk know nothing anyway. Let me tell you how it is.
Steve
and
Jobs.
Then, or Donald Trump, or, you know, I mean, you know, these are people who have really clear ideas of what they want to say. And that's great for the audience. It makes it so much easier for the audience, rather than what they're seeing is a collection of different ideas from different places in the organization.
It's funny you mentioned Donald Trump, because I'm going to go back to the behavior panel, and I encourage everybody to watch them. They're brilliant. You know, 4 people packed in there.
Yeah.
That speech of Trump, you can feel the tension between what was written for him and him just taking control and throwing in his own asides and things like that. And that must be fascinating for you to watch as a speechwriter, because I think he writes a lot of his own stuff, or he ignores half of what's told him.
Yeah, because I thought that speech was absolutely brilliantly constructed. He started off with just an appeal to virtue, you know. So he said, a president has no greater duty than to keep people safe. And that's what you start from, a point that no one can disagree with. That's exactly. And then he was like, he condemned the officers in Minneapolis, you know, made it clear. He was not defending them in any way. They're appalling behaviour, but we need law and order. So he's one of these people that on the page, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And of course, a lot of the trouble comes with the delivery, which is why the body language panel has such fascinating insights. The thing that I've noticed is when it's his own words, is when he does that thing. That thing he does. Yeah. And that's him actually indicating, look at what that body language is.
I wrote this.
He's writing. So he's letting you all know, this is me. I am really the author of this stuff. But yeah, I find it fascinating. He's, I don't get into the politics, like the behavior panel. I don't get into the politics. I'm kind of like, does that work? What's going on there?
You can't, though. With your profession, it's difficult for you to get into politics.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's one of those tribal issues. But it's one of the things as well that you've got to be very careful as well, because if you say I think Trump's brilliant at anything, then people will just straight away, oh, okay, you're one of them, are you? Sure. Even though what you're given is a professional perspective. Well, hang on a sec, I'm sorry, but you just look at the way that he rouses a crowd. And he can speak for 110 minutes and have them all in the palm of his hand like that, regardless of politics. There's not many people, there's not many orators that can do that. Most people have, like TED Talk, they've got an 18-minute max, and then the audience is like, right, I really have had enough of you.
He has a bit of a stand-up comedian in him. He definitely has comic timing.
Yeah.
I think that's a factor.
He's an entertainer first and foremost, isn't he? And I mean, whether it's his involvement with boxing and wrestling in the 80s or The Apprentice more recently, this is a guy who has an intuitive understanding of drama and how to grab people's attention and how to pull them along, and he does it in such a masterful way, and people, just like they do with the great entertainers, they go into his world and they'll go along with it.
Yeah, now we'll go with a safer subject, I guess, so to speak, but I kind of am curious your thoughts. You've mentioned Steve Jobs a lot, and that's why I brought him up earlier too. I do think he is one of the great presenters of all time. What are your thoughts after he passed and you've seen Tim Cook develop? Because Tim Cook is no Steve Jobs. I think Tim would be the first one to say it. But at first, everything seemed awkward. Do you think that was some of the mixed metaphors possibly, or not quite as clean of a message? And he seems to be getting better and better year over year.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was interesting, because I've worked with CEOs quite often at that point of transition, where they have to very quickly send a message to people saying, this is who I am. And you don't get a second chance at that. It's your first speech, basically, where everything you say will then be judged forevermore. You can't do it again. So it's that first speech is so important. And absolutely, he was kind of like a mini me, wasn't he? And I think that was totally the message that they would have needed within the company. Not that it worked for Apple, but, when you have like a real, a big charismatic personality at the top like that, I mean, in politics or in business, you see they go, and all of a sudden the whole thing just completely falls to bits. And I thought that in maintaining the Steve Jobs style, dress, language of personification, Tim Cook is good with metaphors. And I think he's the same as with Steve Jobs, where ultimately it's all about personification. The products are always personified. So as I recall, when he was launching the Apple Watch, I mean, he talked about it as your intelligent guardian, So again, it was the same personification that you had. But I think Tim Cook's done an incredible job and has moved Apple with the times. It could have gone a very different way. I think it's an interesting parallel, perhaps, with Pixar, where they've had a really disruptive history, actually, haven't they? And they've, from Lucas to Steve Jobs, John Lasseter, and now, of course, John Lasseter out of the way. And so Pixar has more of an idea, is more used to this kind of, what can we grow from the ashes?
Well, it was not only the leaders, but is what they were doing. Like they backed into what they became with Steve Jobs. That they were developing software for other people to use to create animation and movies. That's why they were under Lucas, is it was an extension of LucasArts. Under Steve Jobs, you had Lasseter and them saying, well, we have to show off what our software can do at SIGGRAPH, I believe it was, which is an animation conference. And let's put together a little bit of a short that demonstrates the capabilities of our software. Well, it turns out that Lasseter, I believe, is the same guy who was fired from Disney and really loved animation, went through his blood, completely, and had an incredible imagination and took this opportunity to create something all on his own. And voila, all of a sudden they're winning awards with something that's a demo for a product. And credit to Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
He kept throwing money after it because they were in the hole, completely in the hole. And he just is like, he saw something there. He just kept throwing money at it. And ironically, Steve Jobs' fortune is not from Apple. It's from Pixar.
Yeah. And the whole, the Disney thing. This is what I think is really interesting, actually, because it all, Apple, Pixar, and language, what we're talking about, it all kind of comes together, because I think, the thing that Pixar did so cleverly was personifying products. And so, their first little short was the Luxor lamp, isn't it? Which is still their logo. And that was the whole basis, that they'd brought a lamp to life. They'd brought a product to life. And then, of course, Toy Story, their first big full length. And the whole idea of that is we're bringing products to life. And this is something where in corporate life, writing speeches for big CEOs, that's exactly what you want to do. Make the product a person, and then people can instantly think this is lovable, And that's what Steve Jobs did in all of his product launches. You remember when he launched the Mac?
Sure.
And
hello.
Yeah, hello. Exactly. Yeah, totally. And it's like, this is a human being. I mean, for crying out loud, do any of us talk to our Macs? We do, that never happened. That was never a thing.
Well, I do, but it's not usually a polite conversation.
And a bit one-sided, and often turns to violence, I can imagine.
Yeah, but then I realize the price, and I go, well, hold that thought.
Yeah. The amount of times that I've wanted to really do damage to my printer, I have to say, and I'm just kind of like, my office is on the first floor, and I just want to see it smashed to smithereens below.
Well, then I'm going to do a public service. Watch the movie Office Space and what they do to a fax machine.
Okay, I'll look it out.
It is brilliant. You might even be able to find it on YouTube, just that segment. But Office Space, fax machine, brilliant.
Fabulous.
Now, on that note, one thing early when I was talking to you and pitching you, I was talking about the micro and the macro. And this I'm curious about as a communicator and a podcaster, YouTuber, all of that. When you are writing a speech, are you writing to the macro as in everyone, or are you writing to the one and you're just amplifying it so everybody can hear?
Oh, wow. What an amazing question. I think that's such a great question. I think it's a mixture. I think as a writer, I always try to imagine the audience as a single person, and I will really try and visualize that person as much as possible so that I'm then having a conversation directly with them. But of course, then if you imagine it's too much of an individual, then there's a risk that you can say things that will actually really offend 5% of people in the audience. And if you keep making that mistake over and over again, by the end of the speech, you've pissed everyone off, And so I think, probably, Eric, I think it would be a combo of the both, that I would start off imagining it as a combo with one. And then as I get to editing and checking, I'm just doing that kind of sense check. And I'm imagining instead it's being scrutinized by the the shareholder in the audience who wants you sacked, by your biggest critics, by the angriest people in the room. And I like go through it and thinking, well, what would they think of that sentence? Right. Okay. Well, that's got to go. But I think, it's a combination of the two. I spoke about it focusing on the micro, but I think the macro is actually the easiest space to find yourself in, and just thinking, what are the things that hold us all together, that unite us all? And they are the points that you'll probably try and start your speech on. When you're thinking about the framing of the speech, that's where you want to go with. Like with Donald Trump's opening line that we mentioned earlier, a president has no greater duty than to protect his citizens. Well, who's going to argue with that? No one really. So that's, so a combo of the micro macro.
Okay. And I bring that up, and it's interesting, the Donald Trump thing. In the podcasting world, because podcasting is an intimate medium, you're usually speaking to somebody with their earbuds in. So very, very isolated, immersive. And you're always watching out for words like group speak, like, hello, everybody, because now we've just distanced.
Yeah. You're
more likely to say hello. And that's kind of where I was going on that. So like Trump's introduction that you mentioned, a person's greatest thing. He didn't say, hey, all of you, a person's great. He said, a person's greatest thing. So he's kind of, it's nebulous when you're speaking. Like he could be speaking directly to you.
Yeah.
Or he could be to a crowd.
Well, I think that maybe the difference is actually about the style of speech and how appropriate it is, not just for the speaker, but also for the context and the people that they're talking to. So someone back in ancient Greece who wrote the definitive book really on rhetorical style, a guy called Longinus. And he had this, you had a grandiose style, you have a plain style, and you have a colloquial style. And so in podcasting, presumably you just want it to be as colloquial as possible and not on the script.
Talk about porn and and fluffing and
oh God. I'm going to get in trouble for this one. I can feel it already. But then at the grandiose end, if it's a president of the United States making a speech, you want it to be grandiose. And so it's a completely different kind of thing. Someone like Barack Obama, I think, is a great example of someone who's able to jump between those two voices. And so he can do the grandiose, I am close to God thing, that kind of voice better than anyone, where I've seen, sometimes when he's chatting and he's just kind of, I've just realized I'm faking an American accent to an American audience, which is probably
I did it with Mark Bowden earlier. So, we're even. Mine's brutal.
Yeah, making idiots of themselves. Good. Okay.
Oh, I was in a play once, playing Captain Lombard. It was 10 Little Indians. Yes, the name's been changed, everyone, too. And then there is none. Agatha Christie, another person who's being canceled. I was the lead in it, and Philip Lombard, the character, is British. And I, of course, put on this just horrible accent, whatever you want to call it. And then we have somebody who was actually English in the cast later. And he looked at me and goes, well, at least you're consistent wherever you're from.
It's brilliant, yeah. So yeah, there's nothing like an American doing a British. My favourite is Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, which was so wide of the mark, you just can't believe it. But he said in his defence that when he was on the set, he was asking people like, "How's my accent?" and everyone was just like, "It's great, it's brilliant," out of the park. So maybe they were the equivalent of fluffers, just bringing in the porn reference again. We've not mentioned it for a few seconds,
I'd have a callback.
Feel good. They just wanted to, yeah.
Well, so then, we've gone down in the gutter. Let's class it back up and say, you've talked about, you discovered that people in having private education versus public education, that their sentences were 3 times as short. And I'm not talking about prison.
Yes. Yeah, only very good. Yeah. This is quite extraordinary, actually. And you see a similar thing with people who speak English as a second language. I do quite a lot of work overseas. I'll go to India, Malaysia, where English is their second language, and Africa as well, actually. And the far more adverbs and adjectives, far less plain English. And you can kind of try and work out why this might be. I didn't have a posh upbringing. I had quite a confused upbringing, actually, because I grew up on a council estate in London, which is the equivalent of the projects in the States, and was brought up by a single mum on benefits. So quite a poor background. But then as part of one of Margaret Thatcher's strange social mobility schemes, I got plucked out of the council estate and dropped into a private school when I was 10 years old, which was, again, it would have made quite good TV, actually. This kid from the estates going and hobnobbing with these posh kids. And so I'm kind of a strange mix. I can see both ends.
That's
and
helpful.
I can understand that for posh people who have had privileged backgrounds, you want to conceal that. And so you want to get your language down from that grandiose intellectual level and sound very plain speaking, Whereas for people who have had poorer backgrounds, you can see that they might want to compensate. And so they might do the opposite thing and throw in longer words because they're desperately trying to say to people, look, I deserve to be listened to. So that's kind of, I don't know why it is. I can't be certain about that, but that's my kind of hypothesis. What I can say with certainty is when I did this huge study looking at the language of about 50 different politicians, there was just a clear difference in sentence length between posh people, 12 words a sentence, and less posh people, where it could be, as you say, like 25 plus words a sentence.
Is that the same with confident versus non-confident people? Because I can picture in my head, if you know what you're saying and you're confident, you'll make a statement and you're done. Whereas if you're uncertain, you're kind of checking back. Is he buying this? Is she buying this? Am I getting through? Let me put another word in there or something. And that's sort of where my mind went when you mentioned that, is the whole, not just proving oneself, but possibly the whole aspect of, I'm going to keep coloring it to make sure I'm actually communicating the message correctly.
It may be partly that, but I think with confidence, you're then into a frame where to be confident is definitely good, and to be not confident is not so good, which would imply that shorter sentences are always good. And I'm not sure that that's the case. So the way that I might distinguish instead between the two is rather that it's a difference between people who are salespeople who know how to spin a message well, and between people who are actually more focused on finding truth in argument. That's the way that I might. There's a guy, James Pennybaker, who's I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying he was, the last time I checked, he's a professor of linguistics at University of Austin, Texas, actually. And his theory is that people will speak in longer sentences. When people are speaking in longer sentences, they're actually being more honest than people who are speaking in shorter sentences, because the world cannot be explained in sound bites. It's because there's always ambiguities and confusion and, complexity. And you're honest if you acknowledge that. And to acknowledge that means your sentence will never end.
That sounds almost like Dunning-Kruger a little bit, because I've interviewed academics and I hate editing them.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Because of just that. Not only do they go on in long sentences, but they'll change gears and rephrase in the middle or correct themselves constantly. And I'm like, just spit it out. And it's like the more intellectual.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true, because I have the attention span of a gnat.
Yeah.
I've got to get it out there. Go. I'm trying to deliver a message. Keep people listening.
But you and the whole human race, right? We're all like that. We all have
sure.
the attention spans of gnats. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a royal we. Speaking of humor, you have a story that you like to tell. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I don't know which story this one. I have a few kind of gags up my sleeve. I tell you one. I'll tell you a real one. Okay.
Okay.
So, because as a speechwriter, you're constantly trying to capture people's voices and understand how people speak authentically. And so you do stuff like you measure sentence length, you measure metaphors, and I'll do impressions as well. And I'll do impressions that would definitely be on the banned list now, particularly when my clients are from overseas. But one of my clients is Ghanaian, actually, so from West Africa. And I wrote a speech for him, which was all about focus, and I'd practiced it and I thought this is going to be really good. And I then watched him delivering it, and I watched with horror as he said, "I want you all to focus. You have to focus," like this. And I was like watching with horror. This is now going to the band segment, I think, hasn't it? But yeah, there are plenty of funny stories I could tell you about where it goes wrong for the speechwriter. Excruciating stories.
Oh, I love that. How about your Einstein story?
Yeah. So this is apparently Einstein during the 20s. He was going all around the world and making the same speech over and over again about the theory of relativity. And one of these lectures, he was being taken there by his driver, and he said on the way, he said, "Oh, I'm doing this same lecture again. I am so sick of saying it now." And the driver said to him, "Well, look, I've got an idea. I'm sick of hearing you deliver this lecture. Why don't I do it for you? I can dress like the scientist and you can stand at the back of the room like the driver, and we'll see how it goes." And Einstein, who had a good sense of humor, was quite mischievous, said, "Okay, then we'll give it a go." And so the driver got on stage, and Einstein stood at the back of the room, and he watched with wonder as his driver delivered this incredibly complicated lecture about the theory of relativity, and he got it absolutely word perfect. But then, of course, the professor had introduced him, said, "Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Einstein. Now, does anyone have any questions?" At which point someone in the audience asked this humdinger of a question, but the driver didn't miss a beat. He just said, "Very good question. And of course, it sounds very complicated, but the answer to it is so simple, even my driver can tell you."
Now, I bring that up because when researching you, I've seen you give that speech multiple times. And I want to explore that for a minute because you're also a musician.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there's a direct parallel in the sense that you're performing the same joke multiple times, but yet it's still fresh. It sounds fresh every time I hear it. I've heard it before, but it still sounds fresh. Is it like the old song about the musician that by the time you're sick of the song, you've about got it down?
Do you know what? I really think that's so true. That's so true. That's so true. Yeah. And I think there's such a kind of desire amongst communications professionals in particular to come up with something fresh, something new. And a lot of the time, I think what you want to do is just kind of keep improving what you've got, get it better and better and better. And then after a few years, you self-edit and you just realize, I've now told that joke 5 times. Still, no one's laughed. I need to kill my darling, to use the Stephen King thing. And then when you are sick of doing it, you know exactly how long to pause and all of this kind of stuff. I do believe that's so right. I think memorizing speeches is so important. Not enough people do it. I will never, ever deliver a speech. I did in the early days. And it doesn't work. It's rubbish. You lose all connection with the audience. You need to get your stuff in your head. So I don't know how you knew I was a musician, actually, but I've done as a lockdown challenge. I have learnt to play by memory every single Beatles album.
Oh,
from
nice.
Please With Me, right there. You can see I've videoed them. I've uploaded, me playing them to YouTube, and it's been wonderful, actually. And I think your brain is such an organ. And you need to work it in the same, people will quite happily go down the gym and spend hours just to get that tiny little muscle there working properly. And I think keeping your brain and your memory going is just as important. And I think the discipline actually of having written books is really good, because then once you've written a book, you have those schema in your mind so clearly set out. So that thought leads to that thought leads to that thought, in the same way as memorizing a Beatles album does. What's your favourite Beatles album, Eric?
I kind of like pieces of each. I used to like the White Album, but there's elements that drive me insane. I'm kind of more of a Pink Floyd guy.
Ah, well, there's a great connection.
Handoff. Yeah, they both were at Abbey Road, weren't they?
They were both done at Abbey Road, and I think I'm right in saying that Alan Parsons worked on both as well. He was an engineer on Abbey Road, and then
I think he was a junior engineer on Abbey Road, and then kind of came up higher. And oh god, Alan Parsons. We're going to segue again. See, I do that. Somebody I listened to actually knows Alan Parsons and had the privilege to hear the quadraphonic mix of Dark Side of the Moon inside of Alan Parsons' house with his own equipment.
Wow.
That would be just one 45-minute piece of heaven.
Yeah. So yeah. That's so. Here's my my magical music moment, which is almost up there. I went to a friend of mine had a book launch party a couple of years ago in Studio 2 of Abbey Road.
Wow.
And they have in there all of the original, or many of the original musical instruments that were played on the albums. Nice. And so like really random stuff. So, some of the upright honky tonk pianos that they did songs like Penny Lane on are now barely playable, but they were all out to play. And the guy whose book launch it was, who's a senior politician over here, he was a senior politician over here, a guy called Alan Johnson. He knew I loved playing the Beatles, and so he got me on the grand piano in there all night long, and I was playing a kind of Beatles melody on the same piano that they recorded Hey Jude, Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road. And I mean, in actual fact, this grand piano was not just played on those albums. It was also played on, I think it was Life on Mars, Bowie's Life on Mars.
Oh, wow.
Elton John's Your Song. It's like the most famous rock piano in history. And as soon as I sat down there and just played like a C major chord, and I was like, that's it. I have found perfection, you know.
Did you have chills?
I did. I had the hairs on the back of my neck all night long. And like at this party, there were people there that I hadn't seen in years who were like, you know, all right, Simon. And I was just like, it was like a magical experience. We've gone a bit off on a tangent here, but this
absolutely. But I love that. And I like the mindset of it. And where I was going with this, how do you maintain that mindset to keep the speech or the concept fresh?
Yeah.
Do you do it by going into the details? So, well, you've said it all before. You're focused so much on the beats and the rhythm that it stays interesting because you're dissecting it and perfecting it and kind of digging deeper and deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing that keeps me going on it, and maybe this is, you know, something that the musicians do as well, is you need to have just such a, and for you podcasting, Eric, you need such a remorseless focus on your audience. Mm-hmm. You know, what do they want? What do they need? They do not want a speaker who sounds bored of his own script, you know?
Sure.
And that's kind of reminding myself every time that I do it. These people who are here, who maybe have paid to see me, listen to me, or whatever, they're hearing this stuff for the first time. And so I've got to deliver it like it's coming for the first time. And this is actually where some of Mark's stuff, you know, about how to get yourself in the mood when you're not necessarily in the mood, is really, really powerful. And just some of that stuff about, you know, the Amy Cuddy stuff, which I know is controversial, but like, you know, just doing that, getting your positive hormones flowing in order that you can make other people feel positive, I think is very important. If you go out like, you know, I don't really care about this doesn't matter to me, then everyone's going to switch off instantly.
Okay, well, I'm going to go with one more question because I know we're running late on time. And this is a hard one. But your job as a speechwriter is to help somebody deliver a message to communicate people or reinforce a desire or need or policy. How do you reconcile it when it's something that you personally are 100% against?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. I think the older I've got, and the more I've read into psychology and persuasion and human behavior, the less sure I have got about what is right and what is wrong. And so here, authors, like Jonathan Haidt, their works have profoundly changed the way I view the world, because I'm kind of like, oh, I can see actually there are multiple ways of looking at this same issue, like the, one screen, two movies idea that was mentioned in a previous one of your podcasts, and so I've worked for all sorts of people, and some of them are people that some people could have taken the view, well, I'm not going to work for them. So I've done a lot of work with oil companies. I've worked with tobacco companies. I've had no problem with that kind of stuff. I think the one time where I personally felt, because with each of them, with oil companies and with tobacco companies, you can kind of rationalize, well, this is about freedom of choice. This is about helping people travel, whatever your way of looking at it is, you can rationalize it. But the one that I personally found very, very difficult was actually the Iraq War. And this was when I was a relative novice as a speechwriter. I'd been doing it about 4 years. And I was having to write speeches in favor of the Iraq War when personally I was opposed to it. And I found that very, very difficult to do, because it's a matter of war for crying out loud, And so what I actually did then, I just felt, I felt like I'd completely sold out, frankly. And so I went backpacking for a year.
Okay.
And then I came back, and we'd all moved on from the Iraq War, and I was able to resume my previous job. No problem. But that was the one time that I can think of where I felt such a profound disagreement with the person, the point, not the person, the points that was having to be made in those speeches, that it was just unpalatable for me. But most other speeches, I kind of view it, I guess, like a lawyer, which you can see as a good thing or a bad thing, that it's just my job to help this person articulate their argument in the best way possible.
Right. And that makes sense. So you're not there to judge. You're there to help them clarify whatever they're trying to say.
Yeah, which probably makes me sound like a complete mercenary arsehole. I'm sure there are some people that I would refuse to work for,
Good point.
on principle. But yeah, there are, but they've never called me up, to be honest. If certain people did call me up for advice, then I'm sure I would say no. But most people, particularly in business, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, I'll help.
Well, that's fortunate. And to close out, if people want to call you up, they can go to bespokespeeches.com.
Indeed. I love the way you did that. That was such a beautiful seg, Eric. I mean, that was that was like some of the segs on the Sgt. Pepper album, where we just merged you seamlessly and beautifully from song to song there. That was wonderful. Yes, indeed. So my website is bespokespeeches.com, and my Twitter handle is @bespokespeeches.
Well, fabulous. And to hear that from an expert, I'm going to kill this on a high note. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Eric.